Hey everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we have Jon Bernie here and we're talking about his book, The Unbelievable Happiness of What Is, Beyond Belief to Love, Fulfillment, and Spiritual Awakening. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you. Good to be here with you, CJ.
So in your book, you talk about a transmission that you're giving with when you're actually, I don't know, that may feel an energetic transmission when you're reading this. And I was reading it thinking, well, I don't know if this is the after effects of my early morning meditation or if it was something that you're doing in the book. Um, what were you doing when you were writing this book?
Well, actually, the book was edited transcripts of live teaching with in public
Oh,
environments with people. So it's very much in a live, dynamic environment. It's not I'm sitting down and thinking about it. I mean, we
oh,
clean it
interesting.
up more or less later with my editor, but actually, the process of the teaching is very direct, sort of channeled process. And many people say they feel a deeper presence when they're reading it, or even when they listen to podcasts.
Mm,
Interestingly, that somehow we don't understand how this works.
right.
It can access this deeper realm that we call our true nature or essential presence.
So tell me a little bit about your practice. It says that here that been a trainer in the Alexander technique, zero balancing, qigong. You talk about Zen Buddhists in here a lot. Your intro is written by Adyashanti. What's been your spiritual path?
Wow, that's a long answer because it started very young. Actually, I'm 65 now, and I had an opening that happened when I was 16
Wow.
that sort of it changed the course of my life. I was, um, you know, not religiously oriented, really. I wasn't really spiritually oriented, and this happened, and I didn't know what happened, and it led me to becoming a Buddhist monk in my
Wow.
early 20s. And so I spent many years doing
Wow.
intensive training and Zen training. And then eventually I had decided I wanted to do work that would continue my spiritual path, but give me the
Mm-hmm.
freedom to go on retreats and study still spiritually and train. So I had a natural gift of healing with my hands, and I'd been benefited by the Alexander technique. And I went into training in that work and certified in 1981
Mm,
and started in private practice. So my path for many, many, many years was really this combination of deepening my spiritual path at the same time as developing and healing my own human self on many levels,
mm,
physically, emotionally, psychologically. And in that, I was trained in many modalities, and I had a private practice, full-time private practice since 1981 and to this day. And my how I work with people and how I develop really developed in my own development. So
mm,
it was really this sort of two-tier level, which really helped me understand and how I work with people now, which is very much this interface between working with sort of the human condition and simultaneously facilitating the spiritual opening and the deeper realms. They're
mm.
really not separate. Some people work with them separately. Many people talk about them separately. But in my own experience and in my own process and in my work in myself and with others, it's really been an integrated process.
Mm, mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a quick sort of overview
Yeah.
helpful.
So it sounds like you had and what was your opening when you were 16 years
Oh,
old?
it was amazing. I mean, it was incredible. In my on my website, there's a thing called I think John's Journey or something. It's a kind of a longer bio, and there's a talk about it. But I had really started out, even at 4 years old, I think, looking up at the stars and saying, "What's going on here? What's going on?" I was questioning very young,
Mm,
and my mother really encouraged me to question. So I think that's an
mm,
important quality on this path
mm-hmm.
is not to believe, but to question. That was why or the original title of the book we wanted was Beyond Belief, but that was the title of another book, so we couldn't use it. But that was really it, that you question and then you discover. And by the time I was 11, I was really question. I remember being in Sunday school and I was arguing about the existence of God with the Sunday school teacher, and I wasn't buying it.
Uh-huh.
And I was a concert violinist, and I wanted to go to Stanford Medical School, and I was really on this sort of accomplishment, the whole. And and I came home to my mom and said, I'm not going to Sunday school anymore. I'm too busy practicing the violin. She said, okay, honey. And I decided at that time that when I saw God, I'd believe it. I was very much science oriented and sort of
Mm.
experience oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted, and I wanted to have some kind of experience. At 16, I was reading a great deal of existentialism, and was quite fascinated by that. And I think one of the things I read was the universe is a chaotic accident. I thought, is it? So I questioned that. And I started this whole inner process of, I guess in hindsight, you could say I was really looking for the meaning of life. What's
Mm.
what's the point? Why am I working so hard? Why am I getting straight A's? Why are all my parents, friends who are apparently, have made it in the world, don't seem happy to me? I mean, what are we doing here? What's
Mm-hmm.
what's going on? So this was the 60s and it was San Francisco area, so a lot was very turbulent in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was very much that process going on in me. And so I started questioning what's really going on. And it was basically a 4-month internal process of questioning and discovery that I didn't have any other adults I was interacting with. It wasn't anything I was reading,
Mm.
but it led me to these I think the first insight I had was, um, well, if there's any meaning in this life, I should be able to discover what it is because I'm part of it. I'm
Right.
part of this mysterious life. And somehow that sounds very simplistic, but to me it was mind blowing
Yeah,
at
that's
16.
profound actually to recognize
It
that.
was
Yeah.
mind. And so I
Yeah.
thought, oh, and then I became like obsessed in a way with wanting to know what that was. So I said, I have to be able to discover this. And I had this next insight that I don't know how I knew to do this, but actually there was this psychic I went to see when I was 20, Ann Armstrong, who was really amazing. And she said I had lifetimes as a monk and I knew what to do this lifetime to set myself up. Who knows? Because I didn't know anything about these things. But I had a big furry beanbag chair. Remember beanbag chairs? And
Yes.
I said, okay, my plan was that when my parents went to bed one night, I was going to close the door of my room. I was going to sit down in that beanbag chair and I was going to stare at the wall until I discovered what it was.
Wow.
How did I know? I don't know how I knew to do that.
Wow.
And so I did that and I sat down and started staring at the wall and my mind started wandering and I wouldn't let it wander and my arm would itch and I wouldn't scratch it and I wanted to move and I didn't move. I was doing what I now know is very highly concentrated meditation practice. I didn't know what meditation practice was. I knew nothing about any of this.
Wow. But intuitively you knew, because how would you even know
Some
to do any of these things?
something I knew I'd done some acting in high school and I knew a little bit about breathing. So I was aware of my breathing, which was helped. And then all of a sudden there was this kind of um, I started seeing this visual effect where there was almost like a kind of undulating wave motion in the wall. And I thought, wow, that's cool. I wasn't on any drugs or anything.
Right.
And not only that was there a movement, but I could feel it. It was
Mm.
sort of radiating light and I could feel it. And something in me went, this is the right way to go. Something in me
Mm.
knew to go with whatever this was.
Mm.
I wasn't making it happen, but something in me knew to follow it, and I did. And it was, initially here, 16-year-old, right? And it was cool. It was like, wow, this is cool. But what happened was, CJ, that it got more and more and more intense. And
During that
when
sit
I
when
was
you're in
while I
16
was
years old.
sitting,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
so
wow.
the movement got bigger, the light got brighter, and the feelings got stronger.
Wow.
And then it got to the point where it was so intense, I became terrified.
Yeah,
I
it's
I remember
scary.
I remember describing it back then like I felt like I was in a sports car with the gas pedal nailed to the floor, and I was going faster and faster and faster, and I was going to go off a cliff.
Wow.
And I was absolutely terrified, and I knew I had to do it. I knew I had to go over this cliff.
Wow. So you surrendered into it.
I did, and this voice came to me, and I don't know what that was. It's just stay with your breathing. I thought,
Wow.
okay. And I did. And that was the only thing I could be with. And then it got bigger and bigger and more intense, more overwhelming. And then there was like an explosion. And there was no more room and there was no more me. And it was like I had become the sun.
Wow.
I remember describing the feeling was like a million times orgasm or something like that.
Right.
And
Wow.
I don't know how long that lasted. I have no idea. But awareness came back into the room and the body, and then visually it was almost as if the whole room was being imploded into me and then blown out of me. It was almost in conjunction with my breathing. I felt like I was being ripped apart.
Wow.
And my whole body started shaking. I started crying. And I felt at that moment that if I died right then, my life had been worth it.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I looked over at the clock. There was this clock on my counter, and it had been there for 3 hours. And prior to that experience, my life didn't have any meaning. I didn't know why I was doing anything. All the different things I'd done were like just a bunch of different things. And there was no sense of, where am I going?
Hmm.
Something like that. What's
Hmm.
the point? After that experience, everything that had happened in my life made sense and was connected. Life had meaning, and I had a sense of being guided ever since then.
Wow. And what
And
would you
so
say is the meaning of your life? More specifically, when you actually went through that process and
it
if you
wasn't an
further.
intellectual sense of meaning,
Hmm.
but it's this opening, this deeper opening, what that title of the book refers to, the unbelievable happiness of what is. What is really, it's kind of like what Eckhart meant when he said the power of now. It's the same thing. It's that deeper essential nature that we all are and everything is and we are one with, whether you want to call it universal intelligence, the creative force of the universe, the divine, the Tao. I mean, it's got a million names. Who knows? It doesn't matter what you call it. It isn't an intellectual understanding. It's some profound realization of that.
Okay, so it's not like some people talk about my meaning of life is I'm a healer, I'm an Alexander healer, I'm going to be a healer. It wasn't conceptual or intellectual that way. It was
No,
more like the meaning of life is to experience
is to
life.
become one, is literally to become aligned with the life force itself,
Right.
which is really why it's called mysticism, because it is and always will be a mystery. Our
Mm,
human minds are incapable of comprehending the unknowable infinite.
mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm,
have no I mean, we may understand brain function to a certain degree, but we don't know how it got created.
mm.
I
And
mean, people have all kinds of explanations possibly, but the truth is we really don't know. So what happens in opening into this mystery is that we really become comfortable in the unknown. Where on an ego survival level, we're very uncomfortable with the unknown. We want to
uh,
be secure. We want answers. So one of the biggest kind of hurdles that most people face on the so-called spiritual path is really starting to allow the insecurity of not knowing.
mm,
So people have to face the sense of feeling that life is meaningless or that
right.
there's no point. That's often what brings people to spirituality.
Mm-hmm,
It's like, what's the point? I've become, I've achieved all my goals that I wanted to achieve, and I'm unhappy. Why? How
mm,
come I'm not fulfilled yet?
mm-hmm,
And so I think this is very common that people often have to sort of fulfill all their materialistic desires or all their human goals to find out that maybe that wasn't the whole picture.
mm, mm. But
Somehow or other, I had that going for me at 16, which caused other problems, but
All right, I'm way behind your 16-year-old self.
no,
So
you're not.
I'll tell you some of the
I don't
questions.
think so.
I'll tell you a little
No,
bit.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'll tell you where I'm at this juncture.
Sure.
I was just listening to a lecture and of my teacher, and he was saying this concept of I'm not the doer, I'm not different, and I'm not separate, which in
Yeah.
fact you experienced in that one opening in when you're 16 years old, and I don't know whether you carried. It sounded like you carried forward from that point.
It's, may I interject
Yeah,
here?
absolutely.
Yeah, that presence was always available to me, but I had no idea what happened to me till I was 20 when I met
Mm,
this woman who told me. It didn't it didn't eliminate human suffering. What it did was it allowed me to realize that I really had a lot of human work to do.
mm,
I think a
mm,
lot of people have spiritual awakenings and try to stay in a certain bliss or high or samadhi state. And they often, what we call, bypass the sort of unprocessed human aspects of themselves. They can get away with that maybe for a while, but it usually ends up being a problem down the road. So I jokingly tell people after the awakening comes the rude awakening, which
Right.
is now, but then you have this resource of deep presence or profound meaning in life where you can actually bring to your human condition
Mm-hmm.
patience, forgiveness, compassion, and realize that the human being isn't what becomes perfect. People often mistake spirituality and think somehow the human being is going to be perfect. That is not true. There are no perfect human beings.
Mm-hmm.
All the very profoundly realized spiritual people that I've had the great pleasure and privilege to be close to, they're real human beings. And I think that's important for people to hear that. I think I
Right.
often find that people often hear that in my sharing that I'm not pretending to be, you know, elevated. We're all the same. We're all equal. We're all equal in every way. We all have different challenges. We all have different learning experiences. Each individual's unfoldment into the healing of the heart, the opening of the big heart, and the deepening of the spirit is very unique for them.
Mm-hmm.
The essence of it is universal for all of us. That's what we call the presence or the no self, not the doer, those kinds of things, the sort of non dual. Uh, or non dual is just another word for what Zen really was teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So, and until there's the experience of it, until there's the direct experience of it, and usually when you have a teacher, when you're with somebody who can say, CJ, now that I think you're starting to open into that, you sense that opening, something that you go, oh, that's what, I follow that opening, follow that sense of opening or expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what we follow,
Mm-hmm.
not some idea, not some concept, not some technique. Even those things can be helpful
Right.
to a certain point on the
Right.
path. Very, very helpful. I did decades of that, very helpful. At some point, you have to put all that aside and you're really kind of discovering on your own.
Interesting. So I'm at the baby step. So I feel like when I'm meditating, I can reach places of stillness and openness and feelings of surrendering of energy much more
Right?
readily than when I'm off the cushion. So I'm trying to take my experiences off the cushion now to real life, and I realize that
This is a very,
wildly deficient.
oh, no, no. Okay. So this is where I'm going to jump in and offer
Okay,
you a suggestion.
sure.
I wouldn't worry about that at all. And I would be and notice that you're sort of thinking you shouldn't, that it's not okay, that you can't bring it in, or it's somehow not working, or you're deficient. That's not true. You're not deficient.
It's hard
No,
to do. I guess what I'm
no, no,
realizing it's
no,
hard to
no,
do.
no. Listen, no, it's impossible.
Okay.
No, you don't have to do it. This isn't something you do. A lot of
Okay.
people get this completely confused. And you know what happens when they think this way? They get more and more rigid.
Okay, so what's
Spiritual.
a better approach to take then?
Don't worry about it. When you're fully in presence, it will cross contextualize in everything you do automatically. Listen, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
When I was full time, I'm not doing Alexander now. I did for decades, and I worked a lot in the performing arts community. I had a lot of very high end performers who, and they would say, well, they're out performing in front of 3,000 people all around the world all the time, and they say, well, how do I take this sort of awareness into my performance? I said, don't think about it, because if you do, you'll become self-conscious, and that's
Mm,
going to interfere. Just perform. Just be shut down, reactive, whatever you do.
mm-hmm.
Eventually, as you become more established in presence, and that will happen naturally.
Okay, so I don't have to do anything. You're saying if it
That's right.
happens, like, so it's
It
something is
will.
something is happening on the meditation cushion. I have no idea what it is, but it's like even day in day out, I feel like some type of presence here. Like you can probably see it, but I feel like something
Yeah. I
energetic.
could I could feel it with you.
Yeah, I
So
don't
you
know
just
what
have
it
to
is.
just exactly allow not knowing what it is,
Yeah,
or notice that you're not comfortable with not knowing what it is,
right.
and let that begin to unfold. See, we want results, we were impatient, there's a lot of things that get in the way. We have judgments, we assess how we're doing. All of those things get in the way.
Hmm. So you're
See,
saying that
even
if I'm not, if I, instead of trying to do anything, just it will naturally unfold.
Yes, but it also helps to have an attitude that's supportive of the process. Otherwise, if you have this reactive, judgmental, comparative attitude, that could actually create a barrier, ironically. So, in other words, wanting it could actually inhibit it.
So what's a better? So for example, yesterday, I was talking to I was listening to my teacher, and he was talking about being moving everything towards your center. So I'm trying to move everything into my heart and my center. And so my husband was talking to me about something, and I can't. He was talking to me about something like, I don't know where my spiritual practice is going, and I thought, oh well, here's where my spiritual practice. I'm like, oh wait a second. And then I went back and said, I didn't even listen. Like he's actually, when I went back and tuned in to my heart, I was like, wait a second. I just fast forwarded past something that was really important that he mentioned. And so but I only got that through tuning in, going like, wow, look what happened. He mentioned something that was really profound for him. And I went out and like, well, here's my spiritual practice.
Well,
You
this
know?
is this is because a lot of us are sort of thinking forward rather than really feeling forward. So a lot of the training, like in mindfulness training and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the different trainings, really are simple, basic training of learning to redirect attention from thinking, which we tend to do very much automatically, and visualizing, conceptualizing, fantasizing, remembering, all those kinds of judging, all those things, to sensing. So we drop into the breath, into the belly, for instance, and just keep redirecting into the natural movement of breath.
Right.
And then pretty soon, or sensations in the body, or even emotional movement is fundamentally energy, rather than having the attention be mentally foreground. So we
Okay.
keep redirecting attention
But then
back.
that's still doing something. If you're
It
saying
is.
that I'm not
Yes.
supposed to be
Yes.
doing
No,
anything,
no, no,
that alone is doing
no,
something.
no, no. It's listen. As long as you're a doer, it's fine to do things.
Okay.
When you're in non-doing, you things will happen, but you won't be doing them anymore. So you don't have to worry about that's a very big misunderstanding and an unnecessary roadblock.
I don't
It's not,
think I understand what you said. So, for example, I'm trying to do being mindful and going on the inside.
that's
So
fine.
I'm
Just do it as
doing.
long. That's fine. It's okay to do and practice and have effort in that way. That's not a problem.
But
What you'll
what's
find
yeah, go
when
ahead.
you get more refined in your practice, you'll begin to see as awareness starts to open and you become open to that, you'll begin to notice when how you bring attention to what's going on either allows it to unfold or actually restricts it. That's what I refer to in the book and in other is what's working, what's allowing. So we really begin to support, let's just say, the realm of non-doing. The
Okay,
really
got him. Okay,
But
got.
initially, we can't distinguish those because we're so caught in being, we
Okay.
are 100% identified as the personal self. Eventually, that begins to change. Usually, over time, there's a natural transition.
I see. Okay, got it. So for right
Even,
now, I'm
and
still in training wheels, right? So I think for right now, I have to practice going
yeah,
on the inside. That is the doing that
that's
I'm
fine.
doing. But
That's
what you're
fine.
saying is eventually over time, there will be just listening and not, and just being with the person without
It,
having to like
it,
interject or ask questions.
it will happen naturally.
Okay.
It will
Okay.
happen naturally.
Okay, so what was the rigidness that you referring to? What is the rigidness? What's the cautionary tale? Because you had said,
The
hey,
what?
you have to, the rigidness. You had said, hey, but
Oh,
what some
oh, oh,
people do
oh.
is they get more rigid, um,
Yeah.
which just
Well,
seems to me as a cautionary tale. So what does rigidness look
well,
like?
I think that's a good question, and this is where we can begin to see if we are becoming more identified in our beliefs about how it's supposed to be because somebody told us that, or we read it somewhere, or it was in a book, or somebody supposedly who's understands these things said it, and so we have these. We're trying to hold on to the way it should be, the way it is, and so forth. So
Okay,
that's a natural sort of stage of development, which is fine to have. It's like having a map and learning how to get to the territory.
right, right. Well,
So
there may
that's
be,
that's
I see,
that's
I
an
see
okay.
that. Okay,
Yeah, so that's okay to have, but at some point you have to begin to see that your beliefs really aren't they're a limited truth. In other words, it's like the Zen teaching where the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
mm-hmm,
So the description of
mm-hmm,
awakened consciousness is not instructions towards awakened consciousness. People often misunderstand description for instruction and want to reverse engineer enlightenment, which doesn't work. So, and I don't know if that was too
No,
much.
you know what? Here's what it did when I went like this. I was recalling there's a group of meditators that I hang out with, and they're all computer programmers, and so they like to hack. They want to do a hackathon on enlightenment, and so the books that they enjoy reading are I don't want to name the names since I don't want to
Mhm.
malign, and I don't really know anything about these
Sure, sure,
folks,
sure. Good.
but they're kind of they sequentially map out every single step to enlightenment. And in fact, there's like various levels. Somehow
Right.
these folks have made it into a computer game where there's like jhanas where you hit jhana 1, jhana 2, and they're all like, I hit jhana 3 today and I saw light and I felt tingling from my fingers, and I was like, I don't know what is going on with these jhanas. I don't know if there is a prescriptive path that you can take. I don't know. I'm like, my path is just open your heart, surrender to the energy, and
Let me
feel
ask you
stillness.
let me just cut through the chase here and ask a
Yes.
very simple, very basic question. When you plant a seed in fertile ground, do you give it instructions on how to germinate?
Well, there's
Or just
instructions embedded already in the seed.
exactly. And so people come up with, because we like to come up with explanations. It's just what our minds love to do. We love to give explanations. We love to make meaning about things. That's what the human mind loves to do. But ultimately, the realm of freedom is freedom from all of that. There is no knowing. That you are being understanding. You are actually living as not knowing. It's freedom. It's total freedom.
Mm.
Freedom is not when you're identified with a set of instructions that tell you the steps. The seed naturally within it has the wisdom, the intelligence, the creative force of germination. And we also have within us the natural force of awakening. If it's what we're called to, and it's a natural part of where we are in our evolution, whatever that means, it's going to naturally unfold. Now, it can be helpful to have instructions. Sometimes people feel comfortable having instructions, but I don't know what those lists are and who wrote them.
Right.
I haven't met those people, and I don't know if I would trust them or not. I can't comment on that.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately people have to be very wary of, you know, what people are telling them or what they're hearing, because belief can easily turn into what's called the spiritual identity, which may be the hardest identity to see and let
Sorry.
go.
I have these kriyas that come up. That's true. Whatever you said is true.
Exactly. And
Okay.
so I'm very good at helping people become aware of those. I don't have a judgment about it. I had it myself. I'm well aware of those dynamics. I had to eventually let go of those myself, and it was painful and difficult. And I totally understand this process because I've been on this path for a long time, and at least this life. And so I get it. And I've worked with countless people, and I just see how this works. So in that way. But this is very helpful for people to begin to trust
You
themselves
called it a
deeply.
spiritual identity. Is that what you said? I
Yeah.
was so taken back by my head snapping that I forgot what we were
I think it
talking
probably
about.
facilitated that.
Okay, so you're saying that you understand that there's a spiritual identity that we still start actually assuming.
It's
Like, this is my
probably the
natural.
most unconscious and difficult one to
Mm.
really let go of because it's often is very arrogant and very righteous, unfortunately, and thinks it knows, which
So what is
is
the identity? So I'm like a spiritual warrior, I'm enlightened. Like what does the spiritual identity look like?
uh, do I have to think about that? It's not authentic. It's a kind of it's a contrived act. It's like drag, you know. It's like just because you shave your head and wear a robe and get ordained doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything. I mean, there was a guy at Zen Center who was a priest who became the number one heroin dealer in San Francisco. You know, people go, "What? How is that possible?" Well, it's a lifestyle. You can have a spiritual lifestyle. That's fine. That works for a lot of people. I'm not against it. I had it too for a long time.
Okay, I think here's what my interpretation of this is. So,
Yeah, okay.
I was I was I can't remember where I was, but it's one of those things
I think
where
there's a siren going by. Hang on. Oh no, I think it went. Okay, we're good.
I
We're
think
good.
that actually that what's interesting is the outside sound effects are somehow accentuating the conversations that we heard. Because I said something where there's a large screeching, now there's a fire alarm. So anyhow, I think it's all related. They're like
Of
sound effects from
course,
the
we're in the
universe.
dance. We're having
Exactly.
fun. We're having fun.
So I remember going to I was sitting in some event and I can't remember, I think it's called Brighton Bush. It's where like
Oh yeah,
in Oregon, and I don't
right.
remember where it was. So anyways, it's there are all these people there. So there's like 5 or 6 events that are happening, and there's people, there are some gurus that were wearing all white and like long white beards, and they were
Right.
walking around. And then there's someone that's like, I don't know, there is like some goddess something or other, and she had this like big purple robe. I'm like, this just seems like a comedy act. Like, I don't know. And I was there on a yoga retreat. So I'm in my I mean, I'm no better. I'm wearing my yoga stuff, but I wasn't self-righteous about it. I understand what you're saying. So there is
Yeah,
a
I
spiritual
used to
identity.
have, I was ordained and had robes and the whole thing too. I mean, I was very much involved in that lifestyle and that orientation, and
Yeah.
that's fine. I'm not judging that. That it can be very authentic and very sincere, and it usually is. I'm just saying that though one can get caught in the trappings of those forms.
Yes.
But as in Zen, they say form is not emptiness. Emptiness is actually form is emptiness. Emptiness. They're 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 the same and they're not the same. This is where the mind can't really grok it. It can't really comprehend this.
Mm-hmm.
So all I'm really saying is watch out for the one who thinks she knows,
Mm-hmm.
because she's the one who wants to feel secure, and that's not the one who gets enlightened.
Mm.
The ego doesn't get enlightened. The ego is job is to survive and be comfortable. It's part
Mm-hmm.
of our, it's in our DNA to seek comfort and to be nourished as a human being, and that's fine. That's not a problem. But the deeper energetic opening, which is what we talked about at the beginning, really the meaning of our life as that comes forward, we begin to learn how they really interface.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
as you move more into that beautiful space of acceptance and love and compassion, really the realm of fulfillment, then you bring that back to the one who wants to be secure, the
Mm.
one who wants to know, the one who's identified with the way it should be or the way it wants to be.
Mm.
But so that's where healing happens. That's where the healing of the mind happens,
Mm-hmm.
the healing of the longing or the disappointment. And that's where we can do what I call human work. I think when we really learn how to do human work, CJ, the spiritual happens automatically.
And
And a
what's
lot of times
human?
people do it reverse. They do it the other way, and it's actually like putting the cart in front of the horse. It doesn't go anywhere. Human work is learning how to be with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what meditation training is. Learning how to be and doing the various practices that you referred to, that your teacher is giving you some of those, to learning how to bring attention and learn. It's just you're trying things out, and I encourage people to experiment and be creative. And you're really like a scientist and an explorer at the same time
Mm-hmm.
in your own mysterious, you know, wilderness
Right.
that you're learning all the time. So you take instructions, you try them out, see if they work.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't work, you try something different rather than saying, "Oh, they're not working. What's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with this practice? What's wrong with the teacher?" And you begin to what I'm really trying to help people with a lot is really empowering them to trust the deep wisdom within themselves and learn how to access that rather than be caught in the external information out there, which there is overwhelming amount now.
Right.
A lot of this material really wasn't public information until not that long ago. It was very much initiated when somebody was ready
Right.
for it. And now it's just like, you can get it on a fortune cookie. And so it's, you know, it's everywhere. It's like, everybody's got a Buddha now, it's
Right.
like, it's popular. Everyone does yoga. It's like, when I was first doing yoga, nobody ever heard of it. It was just,
Right.
there was one book in the library on yoga when I was first doing yoga back in way back. And so, it's become these things have become very popular, and that's fine. I mean, that's a good sign, I think. So I really think that, what you begin to do is, this is ironically what I somehow knew when I was 16, to trust that something within me knew. And I would
Mm.
let that come forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where I'm really wanting to be a mirror for others and finding that. And the transmission teaching, which we talk about, is really that when people come and work either private or even on Skype or in retreats or public events, something can happen that if they get out of their way in a certain way, something is there that feels very supportive. And it's learning how to begin to let that be followed. It's not me, it's not you, it's bigger than it's something really remarkable and amazing and wonderful.
Okay, so I have to share my personal experience
Yeah, sure.
where I feel like I'm actually basically stoned, barely able to conduct this interview because I I don't know what you're doing, but there is an energetic transmission. So there is something that there's some type of energy that's being and
Yeah,
here's the
and
thing
that's
yeah. It must
that's
be happening all the time, right? For
well, it is. See,
everyone,
what's
right?
happening, yes, it is. But the thing that's happening is that people think, oh, he's this guru zapping me, but that's not really true. You see, that's a misunderstanding. It's really that it's almost like, I grew up as a violinist, so we use tuning forks to tune the instrument, right? It's almost like we're all resonating on this vibratory field of presence. And when someone is clear on that resonance, and someone else is also has that available to them, it starts resonating. That's what's happening here. So
Oh,
that which you are and that which I am are actually awake to it, to that right
I
now. So
see.
there's this feeling of, whoa, something's happening here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and it does feel like that feels sort of like
I'm
that.
glad this was good for you. I'm having a really good time. I'm
Okay.
thinking, wow, this is one of the best interviews. I love this interview. This is great.
Well, it's probably well. And I love your chapter on transmission because the
Oh,
teacher that
thank
I
you.
follow is a transmission teacher, and the beautiful thing that I think you just said is that there's like the it's in acupuncture they have the same thing. They have actually when I was in China, my husband got hooked up. They actually hook up these nodes and they put an electrical current
Oh, yeah,
literally
I know.
through your body. Have you ever had that happen in qigong
Well,
or
I have a story to tell you that you won't believe in a minute about acupuncture, but go
yes.
ahead.
So he put so what they do is they put this electrical current and I was like so before and I barely we're barely communicating even though my husband speaks Chinese I don't how embarrassing anyhow so he's he's hooked up in these nodes and they're like literally all over his back and his butt and the guy plugs it into the a wall socket because in the U.S. they have these, but they're kind of run with like two AA batteries. But this guy plugs it into the wall socket, and I was like, "Holy crap!" But but the idea is that the energy once your system is exposed, the whole idea of acupuncture is once your system is exposed to the life current, it kind of goes, "Aha! Oh, that's what you want me to do." So I didn't understand transmission as being the very same process. So you're like,
They're
this beautiful
similar.
clear tuning fork. I am some version of a tuning fork. So you're like, bing, and I'm like, hey,
That's
bing.
right. Well, get this. You want this? You won't believe this. My mother, who passed away about 14 years ago, Barbara Burney, she was responsible for acupuncture being legal in the United States.
Really? Oh,
Yes,
very
and she
cool.
was considered in China to be the mother of Chinese medicine in America. And when she was first studying, it wasn't
Wow.
legal here in California or in the United States anywhere. She was studying in England with a man named Jack Worsley, who was training people in acupuncture then. And I was a monk in the monastery meditating unbelievable amount of hours a day.
Yeah.
And she came back, she says, honey, I want to tell you about acupuncture and the meridians. And she started telling me about all these energy meridians. I said, oh yeah, I experience those when I meditate. So
Wow.
she started doing my pulses, to
Yeah.
get
With the
my
whole
12
process.
pulses, six, or whatever, three, so whatever. And she says, these relate to all the different organs, meridians. And while she was taking them, I was tuning in and she got very upset because I was balancing them while she was taking, I could feel,
So she's trying to work on you. We're like, oh, I'm
well,
already
she was funny,
balancing myself.
but it was like, of course, that's how people discovered it in the first place.
Oh,
And I
Fascinating.
had a wonderful Qigong master from China that actually was a great master who was a Taoist master and a Lama and also a medical doctor. He told me that Qigong, that the deep practice of Qigong was for healing, martial art, and enlightenment. It was all three. No, they're not separate.
Yeah, of course it would make sense, right? I mean, if you're because if it's tuning in and getting your body and mind and spirit all kind of resonating at this one frequency, why wouldn't it be enlightening,
Yes,
healing, and
that's why the
everything?
practices that have happened in the the pranayama practices, the qigong practices, all these things, they're all coming from these deep realizations that people have had, and then they started, figuring out tai chi,
Right.
qigong, aikido, pranayama, yoga. All of those things came out of a deep, realization of our essential nature.
Right. Well, now I was just thinking about all the different things. I was thinking about the fortune cookie. There are people who, and what's interesting is, um, I think what's interesting is no matter what path that people start entering in. So one of the my son's kung fu teacher is really into Wim Hof, who's actually taken a form of breathing. It's highly oxygenating your body and then holding your breath, which is
Yeah.
pranayama basically.
Right. And there've been, Wilhelm Reich. I mean, there's a lot of people that have done breath work over for a long time that have all kinds of can be powerful and a lot of practices like that can be helpful.
Right.
But you know what my Qigong master told me is that the most powerful breathing practice, the most high level advanced breathing practice,
To have the
natural,
natural
nat,
breathing.
natural breathing. In the Hara, in the Tantian,
Mm,
three finger widths below the navel,
mm-hmm,
where you let the breath breathe itself.
mm-hmm.
Now, that's what happened when I was 16. I mean, that was happening by itself. I didn't realize it. But when that happens, I can feel you tuning into that.
Yeah.
See, that's it. And this is the presence right now. And it's also the chi and the prana. I mean, and then eventually it more materializes into thought and
Right.
feeling and sensation. So everything that's ultimately matter is fundamentally energy.
Right. Right. So all these practices, including sometimes when I've talked to this Buddhist gang, they talk this Buddhist gang. That's a funny thought.
Whatever.
A
It's
Buddhist
okay.
Shanghai gang sounds kind of violent. Yes. There's this Buddhist group that I'm with, and and they talk about these experiences. Sometimes they talk about energy. Is when you were in Zen Buddhism, is energy still a very big component of that?
I left that training decades ago. That
Okay.
was I wasn't I didn't I don't remember what they were saying back then, but
Yeah.
it wasn't until I met uh, my first really I would say my first teacher who was really an embodiment of this was a man named Jean Klein.
Mm.
And I didn't realize, and friends of mine had met him and were kind of encouraging me. And I wasn't interested really in seeing people like this. I didn't care. But I eventually went, and then I realized, oh my, and I got it. It was like, wow, he's really, really a Zen master. He's the real thing.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
hadn't. It was the first time that I ended up having a close relationship with somebody who was living as the place that I had the experience at 16 from.
Wow. Okay.
And it was like we were in love. I mean, he was like my grandfather, but it was just this amazing,
Oh,
oh
sweet.
wow, oh, it was huge. And that's very important that when people are ready for that, to have that recognition and acknowledgement so
Yeah.
they don't go off on some detour. And you see, you're right there right now, so you're doing very well, I'd say.
Okay, good. Because I need to be doing well. Okay.
Well, I would say this has been a really enjoyable time with you, CJ. I had no idea this
Thank
was going
you.
to be so much fun.
I'm glad. You know what? People say that to me, and I'm not doing anything. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, which is what you said is part of being on the path. I'm like, if you really talk to people, they have no idea what they're doing half the time. I'm like, okay, then I'm right there. I'm
Be
awakening.
yourself and just, how you're approaching your process is working for you.
Yeah. Okay,
And you're
good.
still just who you are and enjoying your life, which is wonderful.
All right, I have two questions. I want to have
Sure.
some experiential thing. The
Yeah,
tapping
sure.
your chest and eye exercises. I thought, what's this? Can
Oh,
you
that was
show? Can you show how to
no,
do
no.
these?
Those are just the thing is, okay. there's a lot people when they start working with becoming aware deeply and start really, in a way, it's just a real simple way of thinking about it is that when we become more mindful or when we start to drop the personal self, more of the deeper realm starts to open, we become more spacious, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, usually what also happens is that a natural healing wants to happen in the body, the mind, and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So people start having energies,
Sorry.
emotions, exactly.
I try not to have my head snap, but then it's actually worse.
Right. So there's a
Okay.
lot of techniques out there, and I don't really want to go into them, but there's many, many techniques that can help people facilitate blocked energy, whether they go to acupuncture, whether they do breathing practices, whether they do the various kinds of tapping practices. There's a bunch of different things that can help, and they're really helpful. And a lot of them are free on the internet. You can experiment with different kinds of ways, and so I gave some suggestions that people often
Yeah.
find helpful. What
Yeah.
I often find too, CJ, I have students all around the world, and I
Mm-hmm.
find out that often people haven't had the early training that I had that you're getting of really of yogic training, of postural training, where they are beginning to entrain their nervous system to handle greater amounts of energy, stronger flows of energy. And so when they start opening spiritually, they have all these really intense, overwhelming side effects. And I often say I'm kind of, I'm doing triage in the front of spirituality.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they're having to go learn what they should have learned before ahead of time.
Right.
So they need help with clearing. I can sit with people, often helps them. So I encourage people to try whatever. And I have students that have been working, and I often find when people are having way too much energy in their system, that a very good qigong practice can help them.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can really, really be helpful to help them ground
Right.
and help them begin to get out of their heads and allow these intense movements to happen. And I was just working with one of my students yesterday who's in Sweden, and he was, and some people become dysfunctional for long periods of time. He's really doing well now. He's like, it's very little dysfunction now with the energy, and he's really doing great. And so it can take some time. There can be transitional periods. But so
Mm.
that's what that whole section was really more about. These are just suggested ways of working with too much energy or emotional overwhelm and that kind of thing. And even like expressing the truth of the condition is a very effective
Mm-hmm.
practice, which really comes out of my training, my early years when I was a crisis counselor in a heroin detox center, and we did a lot of
Mm.
Gestalt therapy.
Mm.
And the counselors all did Gestalt encounter work, which was incredibly helpful for expressing emotion. Because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are very stuck in their throat chakras,
Mm-hmm.
very blocked. And if your throat chakra is blocked, it's going to be hard for your heart to open because the heart and throat
Mm.
are connected.
Mm.
Even in traditional Chinese medicine, the heart and lung energy are very connected, right? And so these things are all connected. So I find that, just sitting silently all the time isn't enough for people, Westerners especially, that we need to get it off our chest, as my mother used to say to me, get it off your chest, honey. And so I often encourage people to find the truth of the condition and express it, not running the story. That's different.
Right.
It's sort of obsessing in the story. That when they get that expression, it actually facilitates the release of the energy.
Uh,
And what happens following that is a deepening and expanding into presence.
mm.
So that's where
Mm.
we see, and if we're in satsang, if we're in a group of people, somebody's working with me, and they have some kind of opening like that, people who are tuned in are going to feel the whole room energy go up and
Yeah.
expand.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, this stuff's amazing,
Yeah.
you know?
Interesting.
So that's really what that's about.
All right, so you're coming to East West Bookstore. You're coming on June 1st from 7 to 9, and then on June 2nd from 11 to 2. What's going to happen during a class? What are the things that you're
Well,
going to be
I'm
covering?
sure we'll have a good time.
That's not helpful. What kind
I'll
of
be
things are you
there.
going to, are you going to
I'll
just,
tell
or
you.
do you not know what's going to happen because
I'll
you're just
tell,
going to tune into the energy of people? Like, what's
yes,
happening? Okay, so you can't really say.
all improv. No, seriously, I will be there, and I am there available to support people in their process. And I'm going to talk about this. We'll sit together. We'll
Hmm.
have some silent sitting period,
Okay.
tuning in, and then I'll give a talk and help and sort of talk about what we've been talking about and help. And then I'll take questions and answers and work with individuals. So that's what it will be. And I'm sure it'll be very experiential. and it will also be informational in a sense and teaching. So it'll be a kind of combination.
Got it. Okay. So there's going to be some sitting, some individual work, and then there's kind of tuning into the group and whatever is kind of your sense of what,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
so the greater sense of what needs to happen will
yeah,
be
there
your
will
say.
be, we'll sit together for a period of time, maybe 20, 30 minutes in silence. And then I may give some guided instructions if people don't know how to meditate.
Right.
And then I'll give a short talk. And then I'll actually invite people to ask questions and I'll interact with them. And it won't just be some intellectual philosophical discussion. It will really be like kind of more how we were
Right. So
interacting
you all
somewhat.
feel stoned and a little bit out
Yeah,
of
that's
it.
it. That's what I meant. We'll have a good time. But it was, but, and that's, and my commitment is really to support people in their process. So I'll be available to do that.
Cool. All right. So we've been talking to Jon Bernie, who wrote this book, The Unbelievable Happiness of What Is Beyond Belief of Love, Fulfillment, and Spiritual Awakening. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, incredible pleasure. Really. What a delight to meet you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, CJ.
Yeah, thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.